Okay, now I want to talk about a different kind of learning, a learning that involves more of what might be going on in your brain than what might be going on directly engaging in the behavior yourself. Something is going on in the brain. Something is going on when we are learning. When we are observing, when we are seeing other people engage in behavior, we're learning that behavior. Even if we're just sitting there watching, we're still learning this behavior. Even if we don't actually carry out the behavior, we're still learning. This is observational learning. And the learning is essentially cognitive. You are processing the information even though you're not actually doing the behavior. When we've been talking about classical conditioning and operant conditioning, we've been strictly talking about behavior that is observable. With observational learning, there's a lot that's going on in terms of you processing the information visually that is not directly observable. So this is kind of in the realm of cognitive learning here. So Albert Bandura is the founder of social cognitive theory when it comes to talking about learning, and so he's made a huge contribution to this study of learning. According to Bandura, there are 4 processes of observational learning: attention, retention, motor reproduction, and reinforcement. Essentially, attention, just like we talked about attention before, the organism needs to pay attention, observe what behaviors are being engaged in. You need to pay attention to what is happening. If they can't pay attention to it, they're not going to process it. Now, once they paid attention to it, they process it, they retain it. They are thinking about it. They are imagining themselves doing it. This is the retention part. The next step, of course, is to actually do the behavior, to reproduce the behavior you saw. So now, observing the parent tie his or her shoe, and the child watches the parent do it and tries to imitate, reproduce the behavior that the child saw the mother do. Well, now, after giving it a good try, tying the shoe, maybe not a great job, but tying it for the first time, now mom and dad cheer, yay, you tied your shoe. That's the reinforcement from it. So, this is the process of observational learning. You attend to it, you retain it cognitively, you put it into action, reproduce it, and then you get reinforced for it. And this is how we learn through observation. In 1977, Bandura did a very classic study called the Bobo, often called the Bobo doll study. Children watched a video of a woman beating up an inflatable Bobo doll. Basically, you punch this doll, it bounces right back up. It's a life-size doll that the woman just beats up, knocks it all around. In one version of the film, the adult is reinforced. The adult is given candy after engaging in that behavior. In a second version, the adult is punished, scolded for doing it. In a third version, there's no consequences. What it should be known, so what Bandura did is he had children observe, were put into 3 different conditions, and to observe the film, and then put into a room where the Bobo doll is there, as well as some other toys. Well, there is evidence that in all 3 conditions, the child did learn the behavior. They learned through observation. In the reinforcement condition, the child most assuredly repeated the behavior that the woman did. The child also repeated the behavior in the no consequences version, but not quite as much as with the reinforcement version. In the punishment version, the children did not repeat the behavior. The children did not beat up the Bobo doll, probably because they did not want to be punished. But realize this: the child still learned how to do it. it still paid attention and retained the information. They just didn't carry it out. So the children who watched the punishment were much less likely to imitate the aggression. So here is the adult beating up the doll. Here is the child imitating the behavior. So the children were able to imitate the adult's behavior, and the children were asked to be able to do that, and they showed they could do it no matter what the condition. So the child can learn through observation, but learning and seeing the reinforcement means that part of what is going on in learning is an expectation of reinforcement. Now, this is an important thing to remember. An expectation of reinforcement is not directly observable. You can't observe someone expect a reward. You can only observe someone get the reward. Give them the reward. The expectation is a cognitive process. So this is where the cognitive component of learning is. The expectation of reinforcement, or the expectation of punishment for that matter. It's the expectation that guides the children's behavior, and it guides our behavior as well. So again, this brings us to the cognitive factors of learning. Do cognitions matter? They most certainly do matter. They are, again, we have expectations about what will happen if we do something. So it's important in terms of how the decisions about what we do. It's more than just the stimulus response. It's more than just the behavior consequences. There's a lot that's going on in our head. We engage in purposeful behavior. We are goal directed. We set goals for ourselves. We engage in self-regulation. We look back and look and see, are we achieving our goals? Do I need to go back and change the way I'm doing something? We do this all the time. We monitor our own behavior. We're watching to see that we are engaging in the behaviors that we want to lead to the reinforcement we want. And again, these are cognitive processes that are going on in terms of us looking at ourselves and deciding the paths we're going to take. Latent learning occurs without reinforcement, and we don't use this type of learning until it becomes necessary. So in other words, we have a lot of things that we learn that's latent, that is hidden, that we do not immediately engage in, but we can if we want to. So we engage in spatial navigation. We casually explore the environment around us, even though we're not necessarily looking to go on this particular path. Children ride in the car and they learn the route to school, and they learn the route that mom takes them to the babysitter, and the child learns all of these different routes just sitting there and exploring it, sitting there watching what's going on, and it's basically cognitive. The child is not doing the driving, but the child is picking up on the route. And this information can be used later on in life when the child can drive. Insight learning is kind of an aha moment. The idea that when you can be kind of observing the environment around you, and when a solution just seems to come together immediately, that's insight learning. And you're putting this all together just from observation. And just from looking around at the environment that you're in, or thinking about it. And again, it's not something that involves direct observable behavior. Now here is something that there's a lot of talk about. A lot of talk about learning styles. Oh, some people are visual learners. Some people are auditory learners. Some people learn by writing. Okay. Well, it turns out that there is not a lot of research support for how different learning styles have, where people with one learning style are only going to be able to learn this way, not going to be able to learn that way. In fact, they learn all different ways, visually, auditory, everything. There might be a preference that we have, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to lead to better results. So yeah, I don't learn by watching. I learn by doing. My wife says that a lot. But really, you can learn all three ways. You may prefer to learn by doing, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the only way you learn. So there's really no advantage. However, good good instructors will try to use multiple teaching methods. Help people engage in visual learning, engage in auditory learning, engage in kinesthetic learning, but more or less to try to just increase interest in what is being taught, not necessarily to serve the visual learners and to serve the kinesthetic learners, but more or less to just keep everything, keep people's attention more clearly. Well, it turns out that there is more evidence as we learn more about the brain that things are happening when we learn in the brain, and different neural systems are involved when it comes to learning, and there are certain areas of the brain that may be working together. There are certain pathways that become strengthened from a particular kind of learning. The saying, cells that fire together wire together, meaning that when a particular area of the brain is activated as a result of learning, the repeated behaviors strengthen that connection, like building a pathway. And there is a reward pathway in our brain that involves a particular neurotransmitter, dopamine, is involved very clearly with the reward pathway, the nucleus accumbens in the brain. This area of the brain, the dopamine activity essentially is increased when we engage in learning, when we learn through, when we get rewarded. So in other words, when we receive a reward, the dopamine receptors light up in this area of the brain. When you take drugs that block this particular pathway, the thing that made you so happy, the reward that made you so happy before, doesn't do it for you anymore. So this pathway is important in terms of recognizing why we find things rewarding. Is this area of the brain is really being active when we receive a reward that we really like. Our brain is building new pathways all the time. This is happening with when we learn, and the stronger synaptic connections, more synaptic more receptors are being built, essentially to for sending and receiving messages here. More connections are being made, and this indicates a strengthening. When you are learning, the more neural connections are being made, more synaptic connections are being made throughout the brain, indicating a physical trace, indicating learning. So finally, effective learning also relates to health and wellness. When we have an expectation of a stressor coming up, it gives us a better opportunity to prepare for it, and therefore when the stressor hits, it does less damage. If you think about the dog who's able to jump to the other side of the cage when the floor is shocked, that dog did not really suffer when the dog was able to jump over and escape from the shock, or even avoid the shock altogether. It gives you a sense of control. When you have a sense of control over the stressors that you have, then you feel better about it. You feel like, I can do things that can help me feel better. I can do things that can help me cope with this stress. The fact that you can learn to do those things is very important to helping you reduce stress. Finally, if you have outlets for frustration that you can engage, you can learn to engage in behaviors that help you deal with your anger, to deal with your sadness. You can paint. You can learn new hobbies. You can exercise. When you learn to do those things and then when you get reinforced by feeling better, you're going to repeat those behaviors the next time you're upset, instead of doing something that is perhaps not very productive.